Yes, hey everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good to see you all. We're trying something different this week and for the next couple of weeks. Heather, you want to tell them a little bit about it?
Yeah, definitely. So we're excited. I know we're wanting to go ahead and highlight some of our attorneys. And right now we're going to be starting off with the Assistant Attorney Generals, that are AAGs, that help manage Department of Justice within the units. So to kick it off today, we're going to go ahead and start with the interview to get to know our Attorney General, Miss Ethel Branch. We're excited to get to know her more, to understand where her background is, and just what she did in order to go ahead and get to the positions that she's had, what kind of experience that we've had. I think this is a little bit more in depth to the personal, more professional level. We kind of did that with our interns to help them understand what challenges that they faced, what decisions they made in order to go ahead and go to get into law school, and then also what their future plans are once they have their law degree. So we wanted to go back and reflect with Attorney General on her past and how that works. So we're excited to get to know you. So would you want to get started?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll introduce myself. Ethel Branch Yimsha, Biptoni Nishla, Nakai Dashin, Sitnajani Dashache, Aro Nakai Dashanella, and I'm from East Penn, Diablo, Loop Chapter, Asia Chapter, and I live here in Window Rock. The nation's 13th Attorney General, and honored to be able to serve the Navajo people in this way and to get to work alongside you.
Thank you. So I'm Heather Claude, Deputy Attorney General. I'm also going to be the interviewer for this particular episode. Kia'ani, born for Class Chi'i, Chase or Torachini, and Nellis are Torachini, and Chase are Touchbini. Originally from Upper Fruitland area with my family, and so excited to be here in order to do this. So let's dive into the first question.
All right.
So let's go way back. Not too far back, because you're not that old. Your background. What are some of the key influences in your childhood?
Well, just I grew up on my parents' ranch, and my dad was a working cowboy, and so he was on a lot of the time when I was growing up working on other ranches, and my mom was raising her livestock, and so just I think there was a lot of self-sufficiency, and I never really thought that there was anything that I couldn't do because I didn't have brothers around me growing up, and so I was the older of two siblings, and so we always just had to do what needed to get done with the livestock, and so that just kind of built a sense of I can do anything I want because I've always had to do that, and there's not something that I can't do just because I'm a girl. And so, as I've approached my life, it's been like that I've never really felt constraints on what I can do because I'm a girl, and just sort of the confidence of knowing I've always been able to do things and accomplish things once I set my mind to it, because that's kind of what you have to do on a ranch when you're the only person doing something, whether it's rounding up livestock or taking care of animals, dealing with sick animals, because there's not really anyone else there to help you. So I think that was really helpful for me in terms of just looking at the world full of possibilities. And then, of course, my mom always encouraging me to follow my dreams and do whatever I wanted as well. And
it sounds like you had a lot of support. I mean, I think innately a lot of times people have that, I got to do it, taken care of, and that's great. but it also helps to have people around you with the support that they need to encourage you to know that you can go ahead and do it, you know. So glad to hear that, because that was one of my questions, is what other support did you feel like you got? You definitely have natural leadership, but you know, having people around you to go ahead and support that too as well. So it sounds like you did.
Yeah, my parents were very supportive, and my dad was really great at positive reinforcement. Like in school, he was always really excited about my success in school, and so it's like, oh, you know, that's nice.
Well, and I think part of your background is important, especially because the water settlements that we were discussing. You know, a lot of people might say, hey, how do they understand what Navajo really needs? But it actually sounds like you know what Navajo needs growing up on the ranch, hauling your water. Because I know part of the tour that you gave to BOR, thank you, BOR, was showing them your own farm.
Yeah, that was fun. My mom and the neighbor elderly ladies who are all ranchers, and many of them raising their grandchildren, hauling water, and living a really tough lifestyle. They were just super excited to have anyone come and kind of see what they experienced. And I think that was really eye-opening for the federal officials as well, because, you know, you can talk about how hard it is hauling water, but we actually made them haul water with my mom and nieces.
Experience,
like made them drive in the truck, in the water hauling truck, you know, and they were in the truck when it died, trying to go up a hill with the water loaded in the back, and they got to see how rough the roads are, and especially after you have a full load of water in the back, and so it's really good. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, let's talk about your schooling. You did mention that your dad was proud of you when you excelled into school. So what was your schooling pathway look like? Because ultimately you went to Harvard, and then you also went to Harvard Law School. So if you could go ahead and tell us a little bit about that pathway.
Yeah, sure. Well, growing up, you know, I mentioned my mom was a rancher. She took over my grandmother's flock of sheep and the family grazing permits. And so that was kind of her primary focus. And she went to college. She went to BYU and graduated from one of the Utah State schools. I can never keep them straight. You know, she set that aside to carry on the family tradition. And so when I entered school, she wasn't able to balance getting me to school and taking care of her livestock. So I actually ended up living with my siblings, my older siblings, for the early years of school, and kind of bounced around. Eventually in second grade, my dad had kind of wrapped up his cowboy career and came home and was my school bus driver, basically. And so then I got to spend more time at the reservation school in Loop, at the public school. And I noticed then that the math was not progressing, because I was kind of bouncing back and forth when the roads would get muddy and we couldn't get me to school. Because of that, then I would go live with my sisters again. And I noticed that this off-reservation schools were progressing more regular than the Loop Public School. And so eventually, so I bounced around between Winslow Unified School District, Flagstaff Unified District, and then in junior high, I ended up back in Winslow. And then I just kind of made the choice myself. I'm going to live with my siblings because I want to be in town. I want to have running water. You know, I want to have electricity. And I really wanted to be active in sports and things like that. Whereas like out on the ranch, you can't do that because, you know, you don't have time outside of the livestock, right? And so when I got to high school, I was really into extracurricular, like everything I could possibly do. I was like, I want to fully experience what high school has to offer. And so I was involved in sports, church stuff, 4-H, extracurriculars. That kind of set me up for the path, even like summer programs, math science programs. And so when college application year came around, my college counselor, I wanted to be a veterinarian because I just thought, well, I'm going to go back and live on the ranch. And it was really hard when our animals would get sick and there are no veterinarians out there. And so that seemed like the pragmatic thing to do to get training in. And so I was really focused on like a math science track. And so when I was applying to college, I was looking at like Cornell for their large animal program, and then also UC, one of the Colorado schools, I think it's CSU in Fort Collins, University of Arizona. But I didn't really want to go in-state because like I want to, I like never left Arizona until I turned 12 because our trucks were not reliable, and so we never really traveled. So I really wanted to experience something new and different. And so I was looking as far away from home as I could. And then I saw in high school, Winslow High School, I saw some of the really smart kids leave and go to schools far away. Well, not that far, like University of Arizona, and then they would come back. It was too far for them. And so I was like, I need to go somewhere where I'm too far to come home. If I decide that I want to give up, like I don't want to be able to just easily give up and go home. And so
I think that even just listening to you and saying, I'm going to go far enough that if I can't, it's harder for me to have to come home. I think that shows such a highlight in how you think. You're going to set yourself up for success because you're going to make sure that you place yourself in success. So, I mean, I think that's just, to me, I kind of show now what you're saying. Like, I know people were coming home because they were homesick because probably it was close enough that they can get in a car. If you're further away, it takes a lot more effort to do that. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you guys all noticed that, but I kind of thought in my head, like, oh, okay, you're determined.
Yeah. Trying to set myself up for success for sure. And so when I was thinking about Cornell, my college counselor in high school said, well, if you're thinking about Cornell, why don't you think about, another Ivy League school? So I missed an application deadline actually to Notre Dame, and I was devastated because that was one of the schools I was really interested in attending. And so I was going through the the applications that they mailed to you based on your test scores, and I had applications for Yale and Harvard and Stanford, and it was just like, there's no way I can go to a school like that, But then I was like, well, I'll apply to one of these schools and see what happens. And I chose Harvard because they had a larger library system. Of course, I was a big book nerd. Because what can you do for entertainment with no electricity? You read, right? And my mom was an avid reader, and I loved reading. So I was like, well, this will be a good place for me. And I happened to get in, and I think it had to do with, I think when I think about their admissions criteria, because I did work in the admissions office when I was there, they're really just looking for someone. They're looking for leadership qualities. And then they're also looking for someone who, maybe isn't coming from the perfect background, but they make the most of the resources that are available to them. And so I think I kind of met that criteria. So I happened to get in, which was so crazy to think about now. And I don't think anyone from my high school had ever applied or got into Harvard. So it was kind of a big deal for my community. So I went and was determined to complete it, which was really difficult because I was very homesick. And my parents didn't have a phone, so I couldn't, like, we would write letters, and I couldn't come home for holidays or anything. So it was really hard. But when I was there, I became interested in, I kind of stumbled across Native American history, and I was considering history as a major. And that really opened my eyes to the role that law played in sort of the situation of Indian country and the Navajo Nation, of poverty and lack of access to equality, equal resources. Because when I was growing up, I was always like, I'm so confused. I can like see off reservation, like we live right against the reservation line.
Yeah.
And so it's like, why do they have electricity? Why do they have, better roads? And I just really felt that contrast very starkly living on the border like that. And then when I took the classes, I was like, oh, this is why we don't get nice stuff,
Yeah. Yeah.
The history has been all about dispossession. And so then it was like, well, laws were used to facilitate that. So how do we use laws to undo that and like restore the wealth of Indian country and the strength of tribal sovereignty, so that our people can have an equal opportunity to success. And so, so then I started thinking about, well, how do I get into law school? And there's more about the story of how I got on that track.
Well, why don't we talk about that now? Because that was the next question that I was going to ask, was what led you to law school? And why did your career path after law school?
Well, I didn't know any lawyers. So I certainly wasn't thinking like, I'm going to go be a lawyer.
Yeah.
When I went to college, I was on that math science track, but it became very apparent that it would be a lot of work for me to just catch up with my classmates, coming from a rural public school versus, prep schools in California, the East Coast, where they were just, they were already taking college level courses in high school. So I thought, okay, well, maybe I don't like to give up on things, but it doesn't seem to be wise to continue down this pathway if I want to be successful. And so then I turned to reading and writing, and started looking at my options there. And really, it was just like, I have no idea what I want to do. Do I want to go into philosophy or history or government? Government seemed too easy. And then
little did you know.
Right. And then history was nice because I could do everything. Like, there's literature in that, there's philosophy, there's and it was really great. Like I went to your freshman year that you would shop what major you wanted to go into. And Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, she's the source of that quote, well-behaved women don't make history, right? But she was the head of the history department at Harvard. And she basically kind of scolded us at the beginning of our presentation. And she's like, if you want an easy major, this is not for you. This is a lot of work. We're going to be requiring a lot of writing, a lot of reading. And so I was like, oh, I always love a challenge. If somebody tells me I can't do something, it makes me want to do it. So it's like, well, I want, and then I thought, I was like, this is great because they're going to force me to do so much writing that I'm going to be a really good writer when I leave here. Yeah. And so I was like, I think I'm up for this challenge. And then they have you go through this whole tutorial program. And one of the TAs was from Colorado, and he just like talked like me, And I was like, wow, like I feel like you're the only person that I can relate to here, because there weren't many people at Harvard who were from the Four Corner states who even had, really spent any time in Navajo Indian country. And so it's like, and he was like super interested in Navajo stuff. And kind of took me under his wing. I was in his tutorial and he helped me work on my writing outside of class and introduced me to Strunk and White, the elements of writing. and helped me practice my writing skills. And was just like really mentored me well. He's like, your voice is really great. You just have to work on the style a little bit more. You should, continue to pursue this. And then the next semester, he was teaching one of the history of the American West class, as well as part of the American history tutorial program. And so I was like, well, I didn't really want to do American history because it's like, seems kind of boring. I'm more interested in like international relation history or intellectual history. But I was like, well, so I ended up enrolling in all 3 tutorials at the same time, just to kind of dabble and see which one I liked best. And the American history one was actually really interesting. The writing that we were reading was really great. And then I also was like, well, I guess I should learn about this because, I was thinking of maybe going into government.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if you want to make good decisions as a governmental leader, like you have to kind of know history well, so you don't make mistakes people in the past have made, right? So I thought, okay, this makes sense. One of the segments was Native American history, and I was like, I really don't want to sit through that because, like, it's like my history. Like, you're teaching me something I already know, right?
Supposedly,
right.
That's what we all think,
right?
right?
So I thought I knew that, but then it was like kind of the history of colonialism in America. It started with East Coast contact, and then like westward expansion. And there was this class, and it was we read all this stuff like revisionist history, and then Frederick Jackson Turner, which is like very old school view of like Indians are like the rocks in the trees, and they're just in the way of progress, And so it was like a really, that was our most we had slavery readings too, right?
And I have to mention that I appreciate Patro's comments because even him at that age understands, why are you referring to us as rocks and trees? And I don't know if you guys heard, but in the background he goes, I wouldn't call you guys rocks. I wouldn't call you rocks and trees.
Oh,
so I mean, I love that.
That's great. But so it was like, wow, you read about the Sand Creek Massacre, the Texas Rangers, and some of the California Indian history. So it was like, I going into that discussion session that week, I was like, this is going to be interesting. And so the professor, she was like, what do you guys think of the reading? And one of the guys from like Groton Prep School, he's like, well, I agree with Frederick Jackson Turner, like it was in the way of progress. This was necessary, blah, 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 blah. And then one of the other girls, she was from Maine, so like very liberal and like open-minded, and she was like very upset, and she like almost cried, and she was like, oh my God, I can't believe, like what we did to the Native Americans. And then there was this long, awkward silence.
Did everybody look to you to
pretty much,
say
I'm like, oh
something?
great. I should have ditched this discussion. And so I was like, and the professor just let us sit there in our awkwardness to see how we were going to respond as a group. And then so, and part of their conversation was, she said, she was like, what happened was genocide. And then he responded and was like, no, absolutely not. Like, there were battles.
The preparatory or
the Groton Prep guy. He's like, basically, like, it was justified. This was war. It was, just a response to what the Native Americans were doing to the settlers. And so I'm like, okay. And then, so I'm like, okay, well, like, what's the definition of genocide? Systematic elimination of a people.
You're already spelling out definitions.
Right.
So that is where we're leading to the law school.
Law school. And then so I was like, okay, Exhibit A, Sand Creek Massacre. Exhibit B, Texas Rangers. Why were they formed? To kill Indians. Like, literally, that was their job. And like, went through these examples. And I was like, well, based on the definition and the evidence I presented, basically, this looks like genocide to me. And then afterwards, the teaching assistant, he was there as well, and he was like, wow, he's like, the professor and I talked about that, and they were like, we think you should go to law school. And so I was like, oh wow, interesting. Like I never, that thought had never occurred to me. And certainly not like I wasn't planning at that point. I was like, well, I can't be a vet, so and I'm gonna go do something else. Like I wasn't really thinking of coming back home at that point. But then I was like, okay, oh, this is interesting. Like I could actually make a difference in terms of closing that equity gap at home if I become a lawyer and I work on behalf of tribes and try to bring some of equal resources to our community and equal opportunity to our community.
So with that statement that's being said, you applied to law school, got into law school. And I also want to talk a little bit about your private sector experience, because I think that helps balance out, if you work on the outside, to have some sort of an understanding of the thought process on the outside. And I think that's a good education, because if you're going to go ahead and be advocating for a group, it's always good to know, both ends of the stories or what the issues are. So you got into law, you applied to law school, got into Harvard Law School. If you can give me an example of maybe something that you wanted to highlight, or something to know to get to know you better in law school, and then if you don't mind, I'd like to go ahead and move to your private sector experience.
Yeah, sure. Well, I did a joint program with the Kennedy School, getting my master's in public policy as well, and that was interesting because it's always been kind of like a struggle of like, well, law is this thing that's very like you're tracked, it's very inflexible, and then policy is very amorphous, right? There's like combining two really different things. Law school was really hard. Undergrad was hard. Law school was harder. I'm glad that I took time off between undergrad and law school because, again, you really are on a track. Your summers, you're setting yourself up for employment, and then you dive into that job, and then you have to kind of stick with that to kind of continue to grow as a lawyer and stay on your career path, I guess. But that was tough. It's like trying to challenge myself, but at the same time, also just trying to survive. So I did journal stuff, and I guess some things I would have tried out for Harvard Law Review if I could do it again. But I didn't because and it was kind of like the perfect question. The City of Cheryl case had come out, but my dad had just passed away actually, and so I was like realizing that I kept it together to get through finals, but I don't know what my summer's gonna look like. I probably should give myself some time to process that. So, but that was law school. I didn't really like law school, to be honest.
Yeah.
But being a lawyer is much better than law school. Yeah.
So you mentioned I don't know. I've never been to like Harvard or any Ivy League of that some sort. All I do is see it on movies and TVs and how they're portrayed. Is that something similar? Like, there's a lot of like the preparatory, the old families that are there.
Yeah.
Old traditions that are in those Ivy League stories. So how did you fit coming from, growing up on the reservation? How did you find that you fit in that area? Or maybe that you felt like you didn't fit?
Yeah, well, for undergrad, Harvard did it. They had this really great kind of like a bridge program. They sent me to summer school the summer before.
Okay.
I was like the Harvard Misfits. like those of us that they were afraid were going to mess with their 99% graduation rate. Like, some of their athletes and kids from some of my very best friends. One from like South Central LA, one who was, her parents were refugees. She was first generation college student. Me, so people who might not do well at Harvard, but the admissions committee was willing to give us a chance. So that really helped me like transition. And I think that that's true that once you get there, once you get in, they want to do everything they can to make you be successful. So the hardest part, I think, is just getting in. And it is hard staying there because it's a lot of work, but an isolation from everything that you know. But I wanted to make that sacrifice, and particularly for law school, because I felt like, I really, what I want to do with law is transformative, and I don't want anyone to ever question my credibility. So it's really important to me to get this kind of credential behind me. But it's not so much like you don't feel it. Maybe it's just who you surround yourself with. But like for undergrad, I felt like, well, because all the people I bonded with originally, we all kind of were not supposed to be there. So we kind of like supported each other in moving forward through that. And then for law school, I was in the women's dorm, and I had some friends there from undergrad, so it's like, you just find your group of people, and like they help you survive.
I think that's how people become successful. If you surround yourself with people that can provide that positive uplifting, but also can be real with you so that you can continue to grow and that you can respect their opinions, even if it's maybe something that you don't want to hear. So, it sounds like you were socially intelligent too as well to gear towards that as on there. But I do want to go ahead and because you did go into a private sector, you worked for a law firm, and then you started a nonprofit organization during times. I just want to have a little bit more understanding about your thoughts in working in a law firm and then turning around and creating a whole new nonprofit organization.
Yeah, and that I think has a little bit to do with what I was talking about in terms of balancing the law degree and the public policy degree, like two areas of interest for me. Because actually when I was in the Kennedy School, I designed a nonprofit, and like really, really wanted to work in that area. And it was all about creating a business incubator, and stimulating small business. Because between college and law school, I was a headmistress at a small public charter school in Sabadalkai, and went in with all these really big dreams of creating a Navajo feeder school for the Ivy League, because I just felt like when I was there, I was like, well, I wasn't the smartest kid at public school, and where are my classmates? Like, are they still alive? Did they finish high school? Are they in college? And so I was like, I feel like they should be here with me, So I wanted to open the minds of our community to broader horizons and more opportunity. And because one of the things that occurred to me, I was taking a lot of classes through the Harvard Project on American and Indian Economic Development when I was at the college. And what I realized, because we were talking about how do tribes successfully do economic development, and to me it just boiled down to it's the human capital, right? Like you have to have the people to do the things, and they have to be well trained, smart, and ambitious, all those sorts of things, and have follow through. And so how do you create that core of people and nurture that? and make sure that they actually come back home. Because a lot of they're here, but then they leave. Like they're trained, they're tracked to leave and never come back. And that's like success for them. And so it's like, how do we get them to come back and reinvigorate and stimulate and grow the economies and all across the sectors in Indian country? Going and working at that high school is like, I want to like send these kids out and have them come home, because those are the ones who are going to come back. Or it's not going to be like some kid, no offense to anyone, but like some kid who grew up in LA, Navajo kid or whatever, like they're probably not going to come back here. But the kids who's like in Chinle, their family's still there, and they would like to come home, I think. So like, let's focus on those kids and then have them come back and give back to the community, lift the community. So that was what I was working on at that high school. And, but then, it was very unfortunate that we ended up being kind of like a last resort high school. And so I would get the kids that were kicked out of all the surrounding school systems. They were a wonderful bunch of kids, but they weren't going to go to Stanford or whatever. But what I noticed was that when I would call their parents to talk about what was happening at school with their student, the parents were not available to talk to, because they were working so many hours at a minimum wage job, or working remotely, or they had substance abuse issues, right? And so it's like, okay, that's why my kids are where they are now, because they don't have parental engagement or accountability, right? They're kind of raising themselves. And so then it was just like, okay, we're back at, there has to be an economy, there have to be jobs here so that parents can be with their children and like parenting. And then we'll have then my kids will have a chance, So then it was like, okay, I guess I'm gonna go back. I was thinking of going into education.
Yeah.
That was kind of like what I was looking at in addition to law. And I just felt like in education, I'm going to be treading water. Like it's going to be very hard for me to be successful if I don't have a student body that is ready to learn and be successful and has sort of the family support system that they need to be successful. And so then I was like, okay, well, we're back to how do we create jobs at home? And and that's why I did the joint law and policy, because I felt like the policy piece. But in terms of going to the private sector, one of the advice I received was, you should when you come home, you should come home with skills, right? And so not just capability or aptitude, right? And so I wanted to make sure I was well trained, so when I did come home, I would have assets to give back to the community. And private sector is a great place to get really top-notch training. And I really enjoyed it. I actually joined a private law firm, one of the oldest law firms in California that became an international law firm. And they actually created tribal finance as a practice. And one of the advice I received in law school as well, from Kevin Washburn, who was one of my gaming law professors, he said some advice that he had received in law school was to do what only you can do. So like basically like your highest and best use. That's what you should be doing in terms of the law. And so I was like, well, okay. I don't know what that means.
I was going to say, maybe I need a little bit more understanding what you thought that he meant by that.
Yeah. So I was trying to figure it out at the time, but I thought, okay, well, there aren't many Navajo lawyers who are working in finance, right? Tribal finance. And I thought, well, I want to do tribal finance because to me, it's about, when we were in law school, we were tribes were losing these really, really important cases, and City of Sherrill came out. And to me, that was the Supreme Court saying, we don't really care what the law is. We're going to come up with a theory to justify ignoring the law, and so that we don't disrupt the settled expectations of the non-Indian community. And that case was all about whether Oneida Indian Nation still had Aboriginal title to a bunch of land in northern New York. And they, under the law, they really did.
Yeah.
But Ginsburg and her team of majority of justices came up with this theory, and they, for the first time ever, used equitable doctrines to eviscerate treaties, and to address land claims of Indian nations. So it was a really dark time in Indian law.
Yeah.
And I was like, I thought I wanted to be a litigator because I love to write. And I don't know about oral advocacy, but that's really what I wanted to do. And one of my favorite experiences in law school was interning with the Department of Justice in their Environment and Natural Resources department, and writing a brief to the Ninth Circuit that they ended up winning the case on for a rancheria in California. And I was like, wow, this is what I was made to do. But it was like, I don't want to be going to work every day to lose,
Yeah.
I just feel like litigation we're losing really important cases that we shouldn't be losing, and it doesn't really matter what the law is because the judges are going to find a way to make us lose anyway. And I did have Alex Gabin as my law professor, and he did say, he trained me with a very dark view on Indian law, and he said, the one harmonizing theory in Indian law is that when it matters, the tribes lose. And that was probably a result of that era of Indian law. But I really saw that. And so I was like, okay, I cannot go into a depressing practice like that. So I'm going to try something different. And I was still taking courses with the Harvard Project at the Kennedy School, and thinking about like economic development and stuff. And one of the stories that really stood out to me was about a tribe in the Midwest that had they had really incredible facilities through gaming. They were able to build really nice governmental facilities, and they had a top-notch judicial system. And it was so good that the county was opting in to use the tribal system. And I was like, wow, that's how you really expand the boundaries of tribal sovereignty. It's like you do government better than the non-Indians are doing it. And you have better facilities, and then people will willingly avail themselves to your jurisdiction. And so I was like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
And so tribal finance, to me, like how they got the facility, that was part of that story. And so I was like, I want to go into this area where like we're bringing incredible new governmental facilities to indigenous nations. And that law firm was representing Navajo Nation as bond counsel at the time. So I got to work on some of our
And
really
I think that was the second time I met you. In fact, we went out to dinner in Seattle because I was on the investment team when I was serving with President Shelley.
Yeah.
That was so
She
fun.
was very glamorous. I was like, wow, Heather Clark.
I don't even remember. But yeah, I mean, I thought that was so interesting, especially it brought me in being in the investment committee to see, another Navajo being involved with, the outside big corporation. I definitely appreciated seeing you there. And so that, I think, to some extent, brought me comfort. And I think that's what big law firms understand. You bring in your own peers for these types of understanding and hopefully developing those so they can come back, which in your case you did.
Yeah.
And I, definitely we can talk so much because you have such an interesting, what I wanted to go ahead and end with a little bit here was a little bit more about your role here as Attorney General. What did you foresee or want to go ahead and accomplish when you applied for the position for the second time? And what do you want to go ahead at? Where do you think we are? And I include we because we're both managing here, but with your lead, where do you want to see us end for the Department of Justice?
Well, I definitely want the Heather Claw DOJ building. I mean, that's part of it, right? Because you have to have the team.
Yeah.
We have money for positions, but we have to be able to attract people to these positions. And we're actually homeless right now because we have rodent infestation at the Department of Justice. And so squatting in someone else's office space. And but for the department, that's part of it. It's to be fully built out with our team. But when I was coming in, like the first time I served, I was just sort of like, whatever leadership wants, like let's do that. But the second time around, it's like, I mean, we have the full team, right? And I know all these guys, the AAGs, and I know their capabilities, and I just had more comfort in letting them run their ships, and so then it's like I can be more purposeful in what I'm working on personally, and really, that's an opportunity of the AG and the DAG position is to get to work on the things that you want to work on, right? And so, looking at the president's agenda, like the things that he wants to achieve, and then just also thinking about economic development, like what's the foundation that the nation needs. And of course, water is that, that to me is the foundational thing. We can't do anything without water. So really settling our water rights and having real water in our communities is very, very important to me. And so that's where I focused. And it's been a really perfect time for that. And incredible leadership on that as well. So, that's where I'm focusing my energy, number one. And then number two is really the housing piece, right? Like we have to have people to do these things. And we need everyone here, we can't just have NHA housing because then the eligibility criteria is limited to who can have access to those housing, and the supply is not adequate to meet the existing need. So we need all different types of housing all across the income spectrum, and it's so important to bring back like our retirees who want to improve the community and give back with the skills that they already have, right? So we need to have a space, an entry point for them to come back to our communities and enrich our community. And then we also need to have that pathway back for our younger, our workforce, our creative class, our entrepreneurial class, so that they're creating jobs here. We're diversifying the socioeconomics of our community, right? Because there are some very successful Navajo people, but it's very hard for them to be here because of the lack of housing. And, once they're here and taking ownership, it will improve like the school systems, right? They'll be involved as parent teachers and parent teacher organizations, improving the schools, and it will have all of these trickle or across the board impacts. And so housing is to me the second most important thing.
So just quickly, I wanted to understand is how does DOJ support those, the initiatives of the president, initiatives of the oversight committee and the council? How do we see that DOJ plays a part in that?
Each of the units that we have really, a lot of, like we just had a strategic work session in the president's office. And a lot of times I feel like I don't have to report on DOJ's accomplishments because usually DOJ's accomplishments are when we're doing our job, it's the nation's accomplishments, right? It's we're helping the program or the department or the committee be successful, or the president's office, because almost everything that our government does interfaces with the law in some way. And that's one of the real challenges of tribal government is, especially at Navajo, everything is so heavily regulated. Like you need 10 lawyers to do any one little thing, And that really holds us back because it's so incredibly complex. It's so expensive. So that's certainly a challenge. But yeah, we integrate. We try to we're doing a balance of making sure that tribal sovereignty is being respected even internally, making sure that the laws that leadership have put in place are being followed. And so providing guidance to our clients on that, which ensures some accountability to the people as well. But then also are helping our clients to move things forward and put in place the contracts that they need, or the agreements that they need, the intergovernmental agreements that they need, pushing back on the feds when they try to pull back money from us based on agreements we have in place with them, making sure that their future funding agreements allow for the things that our programs need to do to perform their jobs better in terms of delivering services to the Navajo people. So it's pretty complex.
It really is. And we're coming up on the hour, and I wish we definitely had more time because you are so interesting, and especially the experiences that you've had. So I know I've had the pleasure of getting to know you better, and I see the determination. Definitely see the leadership. And with the stories that you were providing for us, especially explaining that you wanted to come back to bring other people to have that opportunity to go to maybe these Ivy League schools, or even just continuing on for college, so that they would be able to come back and improve the areas that they are. So I know that I see that with just the comments that you're making, that you're definitely a perfect leader, and wanting to see and bring that back to the Navajo people. So, I mean, that means a lot to me as your partner in the management in the Department of Justice, to have a leader that believes in those things and understands, and not willing to back up when when things get hard, because it's so easy to buckle under the political pressure. But I think if you understand and the rules role that you're trying to accomplish, I think to some extent, I wholeheartedly believe that everybody in leadership, everybody in government want the same thing. They want to improve. Sometimes we get stuck and we want to do it this way. We want to do our way. Our way makes better sense. But there has to be that compromise in leadership. And that's where I appreciate your steadfastness, is that you are workable and you try to understand both of the decisions. And then we as attorneys just go back to the law. And it may not be appreciated. It may not be agreed with. But I mean, that's our role. And that's what I see that you kind of lead us to that. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to get to know you a little bit more. This is fun. So we'll go ahead and close up. Like I said, and AG mentioned that we're wanting to have you, the community, get to know some of the attorneys that we have working here at Department of Justice better. And just to understand who they are too as well, and what they're wanting to go ahead and accomplish. So I guess I'm on the hot spot next week, and I'm not being modest in any way, but I'm going to have to really dig deep, because that's fascinating, just some of the challenges that AG has gone through to become where she is. And I know everybody has a good background and a great story. So I look forward to introducing myself and having AG interview me next week. So thank you, everybody.
Looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
Oh, and definitely part of what we're going through here is like motherhood too as well, Yeah. So not only the housing, not only the facilities, but also the childcare is a huge situation. I know that we've got to know our children a little bit better, because we didn't know how to balance them, where to go, or how to put where to go ahead and put them. And so I know we've had a lot of the attorneys and got to know some of their families, which is definitely nice. So you hear Patro in the background because he did start preschool, but we all know that the schools are petri dishes. And so poor guy has a little cough over here, so we apologize for that background, but he's doing really great. So thank you guys all again, and we'll see you guys next Friday.
Thank you. Everyone have a great weekend.